Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the show. Just getting everything fired up. Give me 1 second. All right, I want to welcome everybody to the show. I'm Brother Beniti. We're coming live to you from Fort Lauderdale, Florida. As you know, we have a special guest this evening, Baal Kadmon, who should be calling in momentarily. Just want to make sure we got everything up and running. Again, so make sure you have your questions. And when we get to that portion of the show, you'll be able to ask. Just quick reminder, for those that are coming to the ritual tomorrow night, please be there on time. We start at 8 o'clock, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So for those that are coming, again, make sure you are on time. So tonight we're going to be talking about Kadmon, who's an occultist, author. Many of you are familiar with his work. That's actually him calling. Let me get him on the phone right now. Greetings. Can you hear me, Brother Baal Kadmon?
I can. How are you?
I am doing good. And how are you? So I'm just kind of plugging you in.
Well.
All right.
Thank
all right.
you.
All right. So again, we're going to be talking to author and occultist Baal Kadmon. As I said, he has many books that he has authored. His website is baalkadmon.com. I've also posted it on the Instagram and the Facebook, so you can see all his work, classes, and the different things that he does. All his books are easily accessible. If you just Google it, go on Amazon, you could pretty much find pretty much anything that he has written or put out there. He also has a YouTube channel. He will post podcasts on his channel. He recently posted two of the most recent ones in reference to Lucifer and some of the stuff we're going to kind of talk about this evening. So we want to welcome you to the show, Baal. If you could briefly, for those that may not be familiar with you, if you could just introduce yourself, kind of give a little background, who you are and what it is you do.
All right, great. Thank you again for having me on the show. I always enjoy doing these podcasts. So basically, I've been practicing the occult for a good 3 decades now, and I've studied many different paths. I've learned several languages over the years that helped me read and interpret a lot of the texts that are present in the occult and many aspects of religion. And so it gives me a little bit of an interesting insight into a lot of the occult texts that you may not find elsewhere. And really because a lot of these texts are written in languages that are often translated. And I've mentioned in previous podcasts before that really most occult authors today and most occult teachers today are referencing English translations of English translations.
Right, exactly.
And that really hampers true understanding of these texts. And so what I'm bringing to the table is the ability to sort of go to the source text and explaining it and elucidating as best as I can.
Right.
So that's where I think my strength is. I may not use very flowery language. I will say that I am a little bit more in my approaches, a little bit more academic.
Right.
I mean, I do practice, but the way I explain these things is more academic.
Right.
Because I feel that it's better to sort of cut the fat, so to speak.
I got you.
And just sort of get to the point. So that's what my contribution to this community is.
Okay. And the book, we're going to kind of pick up our discussion, just so the listeners know, Baal Kadmon's recent book, which I'm going to put up here on the screen so everybody can see. This book recently came out, I believe a little over a month ago, if I'm correct. It's brand new. Again, available. All you got to do is go on to Amazon. It comes right up. It is Devils, Demons, and Ghosts in the Hebrew Tradition, Romancing the Sitra Achra. So I want to put that out there because we will be discussing material from his most recent book. And again, as I said last time, in my opinion, probably one of many of his greatest books. I think this one is, like he said, very academic. It's in detail. And if you are one of those that likes to do research and the etymology and origin of the language, this is definitely has that in there. So I kind of, where I want to pick up, Baal, is I want to get into the section. I have a couple of sections that I marked and prepared here that we couldn't get to last time that I would hope we have the right amount of time to get to this evening. I want to talk about the section on Satan and the different aspects that you have. And the one thing I meant to ask you, was that intentional? Not having page numbers, was there any significance to that, or is that just the way the book was printed? I meant to ask you that last time.
I'll tell you the truth. It wasn't intentional. It was actually, unfortunately, an oversight.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, that was an oversight. I meant to do that, and then the book was already out, and I was like, oh God, I would have to retract it.
No,
that's fine. So that's my issue. But
no big deal.
Yeah.
No big deal. So what I want to talk about in there, and you got different aspects if we can go through them, but first, let's start with this concept of Satan, as you explained it in the beginning, and the post-biblical Satan and Satan as the snake. Can you kind of elaborate on that and some of the research you did on that and how you came up with this stuff in this part of the book?
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. The thing is that in modern occultism and religion in general, and I would say probably more Christianity than Judaism, there is this individual being by the name of Satan.
Mm-hmm.
And this makes sense if you read it on sort of like in English. It does appear that there is this individual being by the name of Satan.
Right.
But in the Hebrew tradition, where the term Satan or Satan comes from, the identity of this individual being is a little bit more complex. It's not, if you look at through the entire Hebrew and Jewish tradition, you can see that Satan, or the term Satan, is actually a type of catch-all term. Mm-hmm. So, for example, you'll see in the Old Testament and in the Apocrypha, you will, and the Dead Sea Scrolls for that matter, you will see a reference to the word Satan as the Satan,
right,
or a Satan.
Correct.
So what that is telling me, and what it's actually conveying, is that Satan is a descriptive term.
Right.
So and in Hebrew it just means adversary. It means a stumbling block. And in the Bible, there's a passage, and many might recognize it, is where we have this individual named Balaam or Bilam,
right,
and his donkey talks to him, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in the Hebrew passage, it says that it will be a Satan to him, which is translated as a adversary or stumbling block. So basically, Satan is a catch-all term. So we have Samael, which is a Satan,
right, in
the text. We have Belial, or Belial, as it is pronounced in Hebrew, is a Satan. Right. And so Satan takes on a broader role, and not necessarily the name of a particular being, but a description of a vast amount of beings. Uh-huh. So we have many spirits in the Hebrew tradition that are called a Satan.
Okay.
And so, yeah.
So let me ask you this, Brother Baal. When we're seeing these terms, and again, I'm asking obviously from the Hebrew origin, because when we see these words in the Torah and the books of the prophets, when we see, at Satan, Samael, Azazel, Baal, are we saying from the Hebrew tradition that these are classified as different demonic spirits, or are they different aspects of the same thing? How would one perceive or look at that, is what I'm trying to say when somebody's reading it?
Well, that's actually a very complicated question, because it really depends on the perspective that you're taking.
Okay.
For some texts, as the time goes on, if you go from biblical to Second Temple texts,
Mm-hmm.
you sort of find that they're almost lumped in together as if they are one and the same being. But it really depends on the text that you're using. But as they stand,
Mm-hmm.
really what it looks like is that each generation that was interpreting these texts, they understood it in a different way.
Right.
So you have Samael, who, by the way, is probably the most, I would say, the purest, and I don't know if pure is the right word, but is probably the primordial demonic figure in the Hebrew tradition and the Jewish tradition, far out surpassing Azazel, far out surpassing Belial, because Azazel and Belial, or Belial, as when we look at them in the Bible, they start out as sort of descriptive terms, and then as we go deeper into the Hebrew tradition, into the apocryphal texts, they become more personified.
Right.
And then they become more a-Satan. But really, I would say the purest of the demonic entities in the Hebrew tradition is Samael. And Samael, and I probably would say the second to him is Ashmadai or Ashmadius.
Mm-hmm. Right.
They are probably the two embodiments of what a Satan is, and all the other entities like Azazel and Belial and another term called Mastema are sort of like derivatives of them. So they're just different names of them.
Right.
But if you were to read those texts directly, you would think that they were different entities, and listen, they might very well be.
Right.
But in the text, the way that they are portrayed, they seem to be part of the whole Samael Ashmadai complex.
Okay.
And they all sort of emerge from there. And I even mentioned in the book that Azazel at first did not appear to be anything more than just a description of sort of like going to hell. Like if you go to an Israeli person today and you say to them, Lech le'Azazel, which means go to Azazel, you're basically telling them go to hell. Okay. And it's still a term used today. If I tell someone in Israel, listen, Lech le'Azazel, they're going to be like, well, fuck you too.
Right.
You know what I mean? So the thing is that the connotation of Azazel became a location and not a particular being. But if you look in the text as you go, it sort of makes it clear, wait a minute, it might actually be a being that they're referring to.
Right.
And that's when you have to sort of go a little bit deeper into the text.
Gotcha.
But I would say within the Hebrew tradition, the true demonic entities, really, like the big guys, okay, it's Samael, Ashmadai, and Lilith.
Right.
And then we have, Naamah, who's sort of like a secondary figure, but she's also a very demonic entity, and Mahlat or Bat Mahlat, which is another one. So there aren't many major demons in the Hebrew tradition. There are many smaller ones, but these are the bigger ones: Samael, Ashmadai, Lilith, Naamah, and Agrat Bat Mahlat, and those are the big ones.
Right.
And they have been demons throughout Jewish and Hebrew tradition.
Right.
So those are the real ones. Azazel was something that sort of came into being, but really those are the ones that are the main ones.
Okay. Now, on staying on that topic of Samael in the book, which I found very, very interesting. You kind of we talked slightly about this the last time here. We didn't really expound on it in depth. We talked about that so-called story of the fall and how that kind of can be misconstrued. And we talked about a little bit about Samael. But what I wanted to bring up here, in the section of the books titled Samael and the Aspects of Satan, the adversary, you have a section in there where you refer to him and correlate him with the connection of the angel of death. And then you connect them also in the story in Genesis chapter 3, verse 6, the serpent story. So we see this Samael popping up way back then. And then I believe it's one of the rabbis' texts that you quoted about him being referred to as one of or the prince of heaven. Can we kind of elaborate a little on that and connect it? First, let's, in your research through these different texts, how did you come up with the correlation and the connection with the angel of death with Samael? Let's start there.
Well, the angel of death with Samael really starts with sort of the Dead Sea Scrolls and some of the apocryphal texts where all of a sudden Samael and the angel of death become one and the same being, as does the term Satan. Satan himself also gets wrapped, sort of incorporated into these definitions, and that's why Samael is Satan in that regard. Right. So this is the issue with rabbinic texts and in Hebrew and Jewish texts in general, is that you can have several texts that are very different from one another. Mm-hmm. So, for example, Samael in the apocryphal text where he is associated with the serpent, okay, now he is not the serpent itself. What he is controlling the serpent. Right. And what's interesting about that story is because it's talking about a parallel story to the fall of the angels, okay? Right. Which is very interesting regarding Samael. And even when I've been researching this myself, I was like, this is very interesting because we're talking about two different stories that are coexisting in the same time frame. So it's like we have Samael who is mentioned in the Apocrypha. I think it was the Testament of Abraham, I believe it was. Right, correct. And where it says that he and his entourage sort of fell. Okay. But remember, that was the fall before the fall. So there's two falls. One during the Garden of Eden and one after the Garden of Eden, which is chapter 6 in Genesis with, the Nephilim and all of those. So there's actually two falls. Correct. And so which is very unique. And not many people know that because no one's sort of looking in that direction, but there's two falls. Correct. So, so we have Samael, which is, I would say, probably the personification of everything that is anti-Jehovah, and in Hebrew it's Yehovah, is anti-Jehovah, and he is, I guess you could say, the quintessential embodiment of what a Satan would be. Okay. Yeah. Gotcha. So So as you see, there are different interpretations of these stories, but in the end, when you sort of string them all together, it becomes clear that really Samael is the main figure here. He's the main quote unquote demonic figure, and Ashmedai or Asmodeus is sort of his underling, even though Asmodeus is often called king of the demons.
Right.
But actually it's Samael who is I guess you could say the emperor. So,
right.
So Samael is the emperor of demons, and Ashmedai is the king of demons.
Right. Now, another interesting thing in that same section, which I found really interesting, you mentioned this. You mentioned Genesis chapter 32, verse 24 to 28, the story of Jacob wrestling with the angel, and you kind of point the reader in an interesting direction. Also, you reference the story in the Zohar, where in the Zohar they talk about how that possibly, or they reference it as being that Jacob wrestled with Samael. Now, I find this very interesting because when I do the research and read, I don't, everything basically that this devil character did in Genesis pretty much was on point and correct. When I really read it, I look at the individual that really was the liar and the deceiver was the biblical God, because when you really follow the story and read it, basically this character that we're talking about, this particular entity, was really the one that was imparting the correct wisdom here. Now, I find it interesting because I can kind of see the correlation when I read that story, because then his name was changed to Israel. In your research on that, your thoughts when you saw it in both texts, I mean, when you got out of it, do you see that there's possibly a connection there, that is, what it's saying when you look at it in maybe the Hebrew?
That was probably one of the most interesting parts of this research, was the fact that when you read the Genesis account of that story, we have, for those who have not read it, we have Jacob, who encounters this being who, in the Bible, at least is referred to as some type of angel of some sort. It doesn't even say angel exactly, but it's sort of like some type of person. Right. And he's wrestling this person, but it's implied, because it says afterwards, after this wrestling match, because that's essentially what it is. And they were sort of evenly matched, even though the angel sort of kicked him in the side, and he was like, oh, well. Right. In the end, the angel did win, but that's another story altogether. But when Jacob came out of that experience, he said, he defeated man and God. So he called the place, Peniel, which was the face of God. So he interpreted this encounter with this being as an angelic being, or as a being that was sent from God. But it's interesting because in the Kabbalah, it says something completely different. It says that, no, this was not a test from God. This was actually Samael trying to, how should I say this, to deceive Jacob. Because the whole story was in the Zohar that Lilith approached Jacob and, tried to seduce him like she would everyone else. Right. And he refused her, and Samael was pissed off. He was like, no one's going to refuse my girl. Right. So he's like, all right, well, you know what? I'm going to fight this guy. And assumingly he was going to fight him to the death, but for some odd reason, they were equally matched. And so the tradition says that actually that angel or that being was Samael. So the stories are very conflicted, and that is a problem.
Right.
Because in Judaism, these stories, when they conflict like this, it's a problem. And that's why they try to sort of bury it. They don't, that's why a lot of these traditions, they try to bury these stories because it just doesn't make any sense. They don't know how to reconcile it, so they sort of bury it. But really, in the end, what that story tells me is that was Jacob's confrontation with his own desires, his own sort of darkness.
Right.
And, and Samael was the epitome of that. And in the end, really, it says that they were equally matched. But guess what? Jacob was the one who was injured, not the angel.
and
people don't look at that. They say
right.
that, oh, they're equally matched. No, they are not. It says they're equally matched, but who's the one who walks away with a limp?
That's right. But I'm glad you bring up the more esoterical spiritual meaning of it. So as individuals who study the occult, left-hand path of self-mastery, whatever we want to call it, the many different titles out there, how can we utilize this ritualistically? Because you just said something that really resonated with me. I kind of always used it ritualistically and applied it in my work as emerging with the real self, struggling, overcoming those weaknesses. I mean, there's many symbolic ways we can look at this. But in your opinion, if you could, because that kind of resonated what you just said a minute ago. How, when you look at this story in your experience, how have you put it into perspective and used it more on an esoterical aspect or ritualistically, if you have?
That's a great question. And, I don't usually I didn't cover it in that book because the book was meant sort of like a informational, sort of like a academic drop. But in the book, I referenced a meditation. It's the first one, which incorporates Samael and Lilith together. Mm-hmm. And the reason, and it'll circle back to what you just asked me,
right,
is that we're incorporating certain aspects of ourselves together. And that angel that was fighting Jacob was essentially, I guess if you wanted to put it in sort of Jungian terms, you could say that was his shadow. Mm-hmm. That was his equivalent, because remember, they were equally matched. But Jacob is the one who walks away with a limp.
Right.
and the thing is that is a very significant a story, because what it says to me is that he fought this darker aspect that was equivalent to him, but it was still there. It still remained. He was not pure.
Sure.
He kept on having to struggle that, and that's what he did. Even though his name turned into Israel, he still had to struggle. So, if you want to look at it in an archetypical way, what we're talking about is Samael is our challenge, our aspect that we need to sort of wrestle with.
Right.
And the thing is that we underestimate the power of our dark shadow self. We always think, oh, well, I can deal with this. I just have to go a couple of hypnosis therapies and go to therapy, and I'm going to be just fine. But the thing is that it's not like that, because we think we're engaging with our dark and our darkness and our shadow, but meanwhile, it kicks us right in the thigh and we walk away limping. Because what it is that we're a little bit too haughty about how we deal with our darkness. We always think, shadow work is easy. We just have to acknowledge that it exists, but it's not quite that easy.
That's right.
And It's not just like, oh, let me just acknowledge it. Okay, and that's what Jacob did. He acknowledged this entity in front of him, but in the end, he walks away limping, and that entity is unscathed. So he didn't truly handle his darkness the way you would think that he would have. So I think in many ways it is a metaphor of, you know, if you want to take it in the Jungian direction, where we are confronted all the time with this shadow side,
Right.
but
That's correct.
not to be confused, not to be misled that we think that we master it by just acknowledging it.
That's right.
You know, because acknowledging it is not enough.
Correct.
Because you can acknowledge something. I can acknowledge a tiger, but he's still going to rip my fucking throat out.
That's right. 100% right.
You know what I mean? That's exactly it. And so the thing is that that's what I feel. Sometimes if you want to take it onto an archetypical level, you know, Jacob in the end was fighting this darkness that he in the end could not defeat, because again, like I said, the angel goes on, he walks away with a limp.
Correct. Correct.
Yes.
Makes perfect sense. All right, so now I want to kind of, and this, you know, very, very intriguing. I want to kind of get into, obviously, and take it up to the Sitra Achra again, but I want to get into Lilith and Naamah. And Naamah is a very complex, in my opinion, entity. It's very complex, many different facets and dynamics. Now, when I know in the book you get into depth, and you especially with Naamah, but let's start with Lilith first. Now, even when we get into the Sitra Achra, I know you talk about it when we talk about the other side, quote unquote. Her being the facilitator. In your research, Lilith, the feminine energy, and you know, in some paths they'll even refer to it in dealing with the Qlipoth tree that she is the one that guides the initiate or the individual through those certain levels of learning and knowledge, and takes them through the darkness, and, you know, assists them in getting that higher understanding of self. When you put the book together, I know you got a bunch in there. First, I want to start with some of the in your research with her being the demonic wife of Kadmon or Adam. How does that all kind of connect when we, you know, bring that on up into when we get into the Sitra Achra and the Qlipoth tree, and really who in your research, the character that the Bible calls Adam. Now I know there's so much information out here on this. In your research, when you read that Genesis story of the central characters in the very beginning, let's start with Kadmon or Adam. And I would also, just to throw out there, I know that's in your name. Was there any significance in that? Did that have any connection why you took that name? If I could ask, and how do those two characters start out and connect, Adam and Lilith?
Okay, yes, a good question. Yes, I took on the Kadmon name because what it means, what Kadmon means, it's actually really, it's Hebrew, but it's also a derivative of an Aramaic term, which is kadmin, which just means like in the beginning or primordial.
Okay.
And so there is a difference. There are two Adams in the Hebrew tradition. We have Adam Kadmon.
Okay.
And we have Adam or Adam in the Genesis situation, in the Genesis story. And they're very different individuals because they're actually referring to different aspects of creation. But you know, not to go too deep into that, because if I go too deep into that, it actually will take up a good 2 or 3 hours. But I guess to explain the Lilith story and how she relates to the Qlipoth and the Sitra Achra and how she relates to Adam,
right,
is actually quite complicated in itself, because what you are asked to believe or asked to see is that the stories that are written in Genesis have many layers. So in the Hebrew tradition, the Jewish tradition, there are 4 levels of interpreting the Bible. And it's called something called Pardes.
Mm-hmm.
And Pardes in Hebrew means sort of orchard or like garden of some sort. But really it's an acronym for Pshat, Remez, Drash, and Sod. And what those mean are the 4 ways of interpreting the Old Testament. So we have Pshat, which is sort of like the superficial face level interpretation.
Mm-hmm.
We have Remez, which means in Hebrew sort of a hint. And what that means is that these texts are sort of hinting towards something.
Right.
Drash is sort of like a homiletic, lesson-based interpretation. And then Sod, which means secret. And
Right.
so when we're talking about Lilith, we're actually dealing with the last aspect of those 4 interpretations. So we have, Pardes,
Right.
Pshat, Remez, Drash, Sod, and so she's in the Sod category. And so we have an inkling in the first part of Genesis where it says that God created man and woman. Okay, and so it's a very general term. And
Right.
then later on, he gets more specific, and this is Adam, and Eve. So he actually pinpoints 2 different individuals.
Okay.
But the earlier part of Genesis, and it's right there in Genesis, talks about that God created man and woman generally. And that is the point where we, according to Kabbalistic interpretation, is where we have the story of Adam and Lilith come together. And of course, in the Old Testament, you would never see this,
Right.
Because it's not so overtly. So we have these 2 conflicting stories. We have that Adam, his first wife was Lilith. She was created from the same substance as him. Okay, unlike Eve, who was created from his rib,
Right.
Lilith was created from the same substance as Adam. So she is actually his equal. And so Lilith, in her, in her defense, she's like, look, I'm one with you, I don't want you to be on top. And the thing is that people often think of those terms as being sort of just sexual, that, she just didn't want missionary stuff.
Right.
That's one aspect of it, but it's really much more than that.
That's correct.
It's not just because she didn't want, she wanted to be on top. Obviously it's more than that.
Correct.
And so because we're talking about a primordial time, the Kabbalah said, well, you know what, actually Lilith, even though she was created from Adam's, from the same substance as Adam, she was actually corrupt from the beginning. And that's a very problematic story, because what that's saying is that quote unquote evil and corruption existed before evil and corruption existed. And so what they're actually saying is that God baked all of this into the existence from the beginning. The fall didn't even need to occur because the fall didn't happen yet.
That's right.
So the thing is that this is all baked in.
Right.
So Lilith becomes the epitome of darkness and of evil, of defiance of God, because she says in the book of Raziel and the book of Ben Sirah, where she takes the name of God in vain, and she becomes like this alternative, like this supernatural being. She becomes, in the Kabbalistic text, again, it's not a direct line. Remember, these texts are sort of like interweaving, so it doesn't actually make direct sense. Like, I can't say, okay, from Genesis to the Kabbalah, this is how it was done, because it's not that direct.
Right.
They personified Lilith as this dark entity, and so she represented the worst of human inclination, especially if from the female side. So she was the seductress. She did all these things. So because they made her that way in their text, even though she was not that originally in ancient Babylon, she was far from what the Jews made her.
Right.
She was actually way far from that. So they made her into the embodiment of evil, and only one other character was as evil as she was, and that was Samael.
Right.
So they became the consort of the dark tree. They became the progenitors of the Qlipoth. So when the Qlipoth, when it started to happen, when the tree of life started to shatter from the Ein Sof Or that was pounding through it, which, by the way, just means that God made a mistake when he did this, because he created the tree, and then the tree couldn't contain his own energy. So,
that's right.
You know, yeah. So it's like I said in the book, it's a crisis of creation, a crisis in creation, and so as the tree starts to shatter, those shatterings become almost personified into their own essence, because they're shells and they're personified. And so Samael and Lilith become the father and mother of these Qlipoth. So they are the ones that essentially weakened the tree so that it would shatter. Right. But God created them to do that. So that's the whole thing. So this is where it's all mixed up. This is where it's like, wait a minute. So who created evil exactly? You know, so what was this? You know what I mean? So this is why it's very hard to answer that question directly.
Sure.
Because in the Hebrew tradition, they coexist with the divine, but they're also autonomous. Right. And so it's very hard to describe it, but what they are in the Kabbalah, just to sort of circle back to this and to sort of clear it up, is that they are essentially the equivalent of God the Father. So Samael is the Jehovah of the dark side. Right. And Lilith is the Shekhinah or the Shekinah of the dark side.
And I didn't mean to cut you off, Brother Baal. I find it interesting, the Shekinah or the Shekinah in some esoterical orders. I think I mentioned this briefly last time. The Rosicrucian order calls inside the lodge, the sacred space where the altar is set up, they call it the Shekinah. I always found that interesting. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, that's interesting because I'm actually working on a text now. It's not in pre-release, but it's about the concept of and in Hebrew, it's just for everyone, it's Shekhinah. And Shekhinah, there's another name for it as well called Matronit. And so we have Shekhinah and Matronit, and I'm actually preparing a text about them.
Cool.
It's not in pre-release, but it's going to be dropped it's going to be a surprise. Let's put it that way. Okay, cool. And so the Shekhinah, you know, it's interesting. The Shekhinah is the divine presence, the sort of the wife of God in some way, but it's also just sort of like the divine feminine aspect of Jehovah in some way. So it's like because listen, they could never get rid of their polytheistic ways. So so they created a system. It's like, oh, let's use the Shekhinah as a way to make it right. So the Shekhinah is the feminine aspect of God, and Lilith is that counterpart to the Shekhinah. So she is the feminine left emanation.
Okay.
So it's very interesting how they interact with one another, because they do. Because in the world that we live in, we have this harmonious, or not so harmonious, interaction between the right and the left, sort of like working together. And so Lilith and Shekhinah actually work together, but they're also opposed. I guess you could say they're frenemies.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so
Right.
it's a very complex topic, and I wish I could simplify it.
Oh no,
but
it's
from
hard.
From the original text, it cannot be simplified.
Correct.
People can try to simplify it if they want, but then they're just making it up.
Correct.
But the thing is that there is no simplification of these forces,
Mm-hmm.
not according to the Kabbalah.
Right. Okay. Before I get to my next question, just let me let the listeners know. I'm glad you guys are typing in a bunch of questions, so keep typing them in. Shortly, a little bit after the top of the hour, we will get to all your questions. Since I have Baal on the main phone line, because I didn't want any interruptions with the issues we had last time, if you would like to come in live and ask a question when we get to that point, just so I can let everybody know, just type in the bottom of the chat and I will send the link. Usually your screen name identifies you with your Gmail, or if it's a different email, you could just type it in and I'll send you the link to your email and you can come in live and ask a question. Once you ask your question live, then we're going to ask you to go ahead and leave so we don't have any interference and take the next person. So that's how we're going to do this. And I wanted to do it this way because, again, I didn't want any interference with the phone lines and the connections, because I kind of knew what was going on last time. So I wanted to make sure we avoided that and didn't, get our flow interrupted on what we're discussing. So that'll be coming shortly, but keep typing in your questions. When I get to that point, I'll go to the top of the chat. I'll start from the top, and as many as we have the ability to get to this evening, I will forward them over to Brother Baal Kadmon, and he will answer to the best of his ability. Okay, so I just wanted to put that out there. So keep typing them in. So one thing I wanted to ask you before we move on from this, in your research, Brother Baal, I know some of the history, when you look at it, when you get into the book of Ezra, for an example, when it mentions when the ancient Hebrews came out of captivity from Babylon, some stayed. I don't know how bad that captivity actually was. I have different thoughts on that. And some came back into Jerusalem with Ezra, as the Bible describes, and they rebuilt Solomon's temple. Now, some historians will say that is kind of the period where they compiled and put the written form of the Torah together. And I'm saying that to say, in your studies, how much of an influence have you seen? Because some historians will say that when you're reading the Genesis story, you're also seeing aspects of the Naamah and some of the Sumerian tablets. Have you done any research when you were doing this? Any connection that you have seen with that in some of your historical research? Were the Jews influenced by some of this Babylonian or Sumerian culture? And how much of it crept into the Torah is what I'm asking.
That's a great question. And the easy answer is absolutely. And the thing is that they were completely influenced by it. Okay. Because, and again, just to clarify, the Bible that we have currently, the Hebrew Bible, just the Old Testament from the Jewish perspective, not the Septuagint, not any of these things, is, it's not chronological, really. Correct. The way that it's written, because remember, they compiled this much later.
That's right.
But those stories are very much from the Naamah and Qlipoth, but actually more so, the early aspect, yes, the tohu vavohu, the chaos and void, yes, that is Tiamat. Right. There's no doubt about it, because Tiamat in the Mesopotamian Naamah and Qlipoth is a cognate of the word tehom, which means chaos or like emptiness. And so, yeah, we have that, but that is a less obvious connection. I make that connection in my book, Tiamat Unveiled.
Okay.
But even a more direct connection in the Epic of Gilgamesh. And Gilgamesh, it was this king that some would say he was a mythic king, some say that he was a real king, whatever. I mean, it really depends on your perspective. But there is an Epic of Gilgamesh that predates the Bible by at least what we know of, at least 1,000, some even say 2,000 years. And in the back end of the Epic of Gilgamesh, Gilgamesh encounters someone by the name of Ut-Napishtim.
Correct.
And Ut-Napishtim is the equivalent of Noah, we have in the Bible, right?
The flood story.
So he's talking about the ark and the whole thing, the whole story. I mean, obviously there are some differences, and so there's a direct connection there. I mean, there's no doubt. The only thing that the Bible has for it when it comes to these connections is that they were able, the writers of the Bible were able to take those stories and sort of consolidate them so they were at least somewhat consistent. Because we have several epics of Gilgamesh. There is not just one.
That's right.
We usually encounter just one because that's what we're used to. But really, there are several encounters of the Epic of Gilgamesh, and therefore there are several Ut-Napishtim encounters as well. And so the Bible did a good job, or the redactors and the writers of the Bible did a good job at sort of stripping away some of the extraneous ideas and sort of putting them into one story. And they mess up. I mean, if you look at it closely, you'll be like, oh, wait, there's actually an inconsistency here, where it says, bring 7 of these animals and then only 2 of these animals. You know what I mean? So it's like there's some inconsistencies in the story, but they were much more organized than the Epic of Gilgamesh. But clearly they are taking from the Babylonian religion, the Babylonian mythology. And just to mention the book of Enoch, or Enoch, in Hebrew it's Hanoch, but that whole text, and I wrote that in my book, The Watchers and Their Ways, I mentioned that the book of Enoch, which is sort of like a response to the whole Noah story and even after Noah, is actually a response to Babylonian mythology. I mean, they sort of incorporate many of the elements, and interestingly enough, as I mentioned in that book, the Dead Sea Scrolls, they quote, they have their own version of Enoch there. What do they name one of the characters in that story? They name him Gilgamesh.
That's right.
You know what I mean? So the thing is that clearly they are incorporating the Babylonian ideas into them. So there is no doubt about it that when we read the book of Genesis, many aspects, it is not an original text. It is a redacted text.
Thank you.
It is a text that took on many different influences from around the region. I mean, look, Abraham himself was from Babylon.
That's right.
So, you know what I mean? So it's like there's stuff coming in from all sides.
That's right.
And they incorporated it. And then later on, as the Hebrew tradition moved forward, then you had more of the Babylonian influence. But interestingly enough, there's not a lot of Egyptian influence. It's even though they were captives in Egypt for X amount of years, when you look at their, at the core text, they're more Babylonian and Canaanite than they are actually Egyptian.
That's right.
And so that also throws the whole idea of, did the Israelites were they actually enslaved in Egypt? Yes or no? I'm not 100% convinced that they were.
Correct.
I'm what they call a biblical minimalist. So for me, you better bring a lot of research to me, because there's just not enough of it.
Well,
so that's where I stand on that. But yes, absolutely.
Right.
Babylonian, Mesopotamian ideas are completely immersed in the Old Testament, completely.
And on two notes on that, I'm glad you broke that down. Speaking of the whole Israelites being in bondage in Egypt for 400 years. Now, we know the Egyptians kept meticulous records. The Oxford Annotated Bible, so I can give the source to you and everybody listening. I find, and I always suggest this as one of the translations people should have, not just so much for the English translation of, but for the commentary. And the Oxford Annotated Bible is supposedly put together by some of the world's elite evangelists like Billy Graham and, the whole crew of cronies that I like to call them. But I found it interesting in there. They came up with data and research to suggest that though you cannot find a story of any group of people called Israelites in bondage in Egypt for 400 plus years, but they mention in there, they liken it to the Hyksos who came into ancient Egypt and were in bondage there for 430 years. And the story is very similar, how they were driven out by this character called Thutmose, which were they likened to,
exactly. Ahmose and Thutmose.
There you go.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, let me just jump in there for a moment, because there is a lot of misconception here about this. The thing is that yes, the Hyksos did come into Egypt, but the thing is that they were not in bondage.
Right.
If anything, they were terrorizing the Egyptians.
Correct.
So they were not in bondage whatsoever. The Hyksos were actually in charge.
Right, they came in and
so
invaded.
The Egyptians actually feared the Hyksos.
Right.
And so really what happened was that Ahmose and Thutmose, they were actually brothers. And by the way, Moses, there is a connection there.
Right.
They repelled the Hyksos, or the sea people, from Egypt. And by the way, the fact that they're already called sea people already shows you that it's probably not the Semites, because they were not sea people.
Right.
So there alone already says they were not Hebrew, because the Hebrews were not sea people.
Right.
So that alone already takes care of that. But the thing is that the Ahmose and Thutmose, they pushed out the Hyksos from Egypt.
Correct.
But again, so the story is very different. It wasn't that they left on their own accord. They were pushed out.
Correct.
So that already gives me some indication that perhaps maybe the Hyksos were not in fact the Hebrews, or the Haberu. There were a people called the Haberu.
Correct.
And so that story is a little bit questionable in that sense. And just to continue on this road, is that there is no indication anywhere in history outside of the Bible that the Israelites or the Hebrew people were of any type of consequence whatsoever.
Right.
So, for example, we have, after Ramses II, we have Ramses II, who is, quote unquote, the Pharaoh of the Exodus, which is not true, but that's what a lot of people say.
Correct.
His son, Merneptah, conquered, went east into Canaan, which is where where really the Israelites, became a nation. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting. He put up a stela, and it's called the Merneptah stela, and it itemizes every single nation that it conquered. And interestingly enough, the way he itemized it was this nation, this nation, this nation. And when he went to the Israelites, he described them as just like a small band of, just people. he didn't qualify them as a nation.
Right.
So they weren't even considered a nation after Ramses II. So the thing is that these stories are just, thrown about. We don't have any proof that there was ever any type of Israelite Hebrew connection to Egypt. I mean, there just isn't anything specific. Could they be a mixed multitude, as it says in the book of Exodus, that they are a mixed multitude? Yes, that's probably true.
Right.
So there's not one Hebrew nation that may have been living in the Delta region, but many. And that's probably what that is. But yeah, the Hyksos hypothesis has been refuted long ago because a lot of those aspects just don't apply to the Hebrews. It just doesn't apply. You know? Right.
And one more thing, I want to back up a second to the Enoch character, which I found this very interesting. When we read the information, obviously on Enoch is very vague in the book of Genesis.
Yeah.
It's weird how it just randomly pops up, and I've always found it odd how it kind of finishes off where it says Enoch walked and talked with God, and Enoch was, and that's it. It don't really, after it says Enoch, it doesn't really say anything else after that. When you look at that story in the Hebrew, many people have interpreted that Enoch was, taken up, to some heavenly abode and was taken up in spirit. Some have said it's symbolized, of astral traveling. This is just people's interpretations. When you have looked at, or have you, I should ask first, have you looked at that story in the Hebrew in Genesis? And from the Hebrew, if you have, from the Hebrew language, what did you get out of it when you're reading that passage in Genesis where it says he walked and talked with God and Enoch was? If you could elaborate on it, if you have looked into that. I'm not sure if you have. I just was curious because you brought up Enoch a little while ago.
Yeah, and I cover it in my book, The Watchers and Their Ways. Really, there is not a lot there. I mean, it just says that Enoch lived to 365 years and he was no more. God took him.
Exactly.
And so there's nothing really there, but I do mention in the book that there are extra biblical texts that sort of talk about this. Mm. And those texts say two conflicting things. We have one body of texts called, and they're actually in the same group of texts, are called the Targumim. Mm-hmm. And Targumim, the term Targum really just means translation. Right. But they actually turn out to be more than just translations. They turn out to be interpretations as well. And they're all in Aramaic. Mm-hmm. The Targumim are completely in Aramaic. So there's two ideas here. We have that Enoch was so righteous that God was like, you know what? You're the shit. I'm taking you up. Okay. And that's it. So just like, Elijah, Elijah was so holy, he just took him up. They didn't have to die. Right. Okay. But in the other Targum, and I think that was Targum Neofti, I think, where it says Enoch died and God took him. Whereas the other Targum says he didn't die, he just went up. So there is some conflict as to what exactly happened to Enoch. And the reason why the Targums are so different is because they're appealing to, actually, interestingly enough, to a more rational crowd. So they had to sort of make it palatable for them. But in the text, it is clear that what has happened is that Enoch, Hanoch, was righteous. And we don't know about why he was righteous. Only in the Apocrypha do we know this. Right. And God was like, no, you're so holy and you're so right that we're going to out of this world. Okay. And that was what the book of Enoch is about, is sort of about his life and about his travels through the celestial realm.
Okay.
So the story is that he is just a very holy individual. He was almost too holy to be on earth. And the book of Enoch describes his life. But the Bible itself doesn't give any indication
That's right.
as to why he would be taken up for whatever reason. It just said he was, God liked him and took him up.
Took him up.
You know what I mean?
Got it.
And that's it. So
Got
there's no clear indication as to why this happened.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. All right, the last thing I want to get into, I know probably not the best thing, because this we thought Lilith was kind of complicated, and I'm not asking you to, because again, we could probably do a whole show just on Naamah. I want to get into that, and again, then after this, again, I just want to remind the listeners. After this, I'm glad to see you guys typing in. We've got a bunch of questions here. I will feed the questions to Baal Kadmon shortly. If you want to come in, again, just type in the chat. You would like to come in and ask him a question live. And Raven, I know you're here. If you hear me, I would have you watch the bottom and just bring to my attention anybody that wants to come in. I just want to copy that you heard that. If you could just let me verify that you heard that, either just confirm. Just let me know when you see somebody that wants to come in at the bottom. This way I can stay focused on the questions. Okay. I'm not sure if you're currently listening right now, but I see you here. I'll remind you shortly in a minute. Okay, but
it's confirmed. I heard you.
Right, I'll scroll up, and I mean, if I miss something too in the chat, you can let me know. But this way, I don't have to stay at the bottom to look. You can
Understood. Yep, okay, cool. Understood.
All right, so the last thing about probably one of the best thing to do last, but I do want to get into this because I think it's critical since we talked about Lilith. Naamah represents so many things, and again, like you said with Lilith, you can't really simplify this because you'd be doing it injustice. I want to first talk about the aspect of Naamah and Tubal-Cain. Now, I want to bring this up because I've talked a little bit about this in the past on some of my previous shows, and I kind of correlated it. There's a connection there with Masonry, and I know myself going through a Masonic lodge. Tubal-Cain, I always found interesting is what they tell you on the 3rd degree of Masonry is the substitute word of a master Mason. And we know Tubal-Cain to be a sorcerer, a magician. If you could kind of connect, because I think Naamah is critical when working with this, the Citra Akra and the Qlipothic tree, the correlation between Naamah, Lilith, and really this character called Tubal-Cain that's very, very mystical to those that may not know about it. Can you kind of maybe elaborate a little bit on that connection? I know, again, it's not something you can do quick, but maybe we can at least break the ice with it.
Yeah, that's a good question. Naamah, by the way, her name, Naamah, means the pleasant one. You know, she actually has a very benign name.
Right.
It's actually the derivative of the name Naomi, which also means the pleasant one. So it's actually a derivative name. This is actually one of the more obscure topics in Kabbalah specifically. And I can't really talk too much to the Freemasonry side of this,
right?
But I can talk at least from the Kabbalistic side,
sure,
which I assume that the Freemasons do borrow from on some level.
Yes, they do.
Naamah is a very enigmatic character because she is the sister of Tubal-Cain, and Tubal-Cain is a relative of Cain, the actual Cain, right? Cain and Abel, the whole lineage there. In the Bible, she is a very innocuous person. She does. There's no indication that she has any malefic intent. She was almost like an Eve type character. She didn't have anything specific that you would grab onto and you'd be like, oh, this is Naamah,
Mm-hmm.
And just like Eve, Eve was from Adam's, rib, and you know what I mean? So actually Eve probably has more going on than Naamah in the Bible. But the thing is that in the Kabbalah, Naamah, because of her association with Cain, with her ancestor, who was Cain, she became demonic. And the thing is that we don't know exactly why. We're looking, when you look at those texts, it's not exactly clear why Naamah became sort of this malevolent entity in Judaism. It's not very clear at all. But what we do know of her, if we are to look at it from the malefic, let me not use malefic, but for sort of the left-hand emanation, is that she is a kind of auxiliary force to Lilith. Lilith is the matron, okay? She's the matronit, okay? So she is the matron of the feminine divine, but the left-hand feminine divine. And Naamah is in many ways a kind of, I'm trying to find the right word. I wouldn't say a recruit, but sort of like an extension of Lilith's power. Because in the Kabbalah, it states that Naamah, everything she does, okay, she herself becomes very lustful towards men, and she inspires lust in men. And the lust that she inspires in them is enough to have these men impregnate their wives with quote unquote demonic children, or I would say possessed children. Mm-hmm. So basically what she does, she in her own lust inspires lust in a man. The man has sex with his wife, impregnates her, and that child becomes the child of Naamah. And Naamah then takes that child, and Lilith essentially nurses them. So Naamah, in her own right, is a very seductive, very powerful being, but she answers in the end to Lilith. But again, it is not clear why she is what she is. Like, we don't understand why, and the Kabbalah doesn't make it clear either, as why Naamah went from being the sister of Tubal-Cain to the embodiment, or I guess you could say the second in command of the divine feminine of the left-hand path. Why that is. And that's a mystery that I don't think anyone's going to be able to figure out unless they want to sort of channel her or tap into her. So there isn't a clear answer as to why she is subservient to Lilith, but she is in many ways much more powerful because she is sort of on the ground and she does her aspects. Now, to me, she's not an evil entity. Again, remember, these terms are found in the Jewish religion. They're obviously going to malign them, but in essence, she's, again, a powerful woman that they do not have control over, that they have no clear understanding of. And like I said, there is no clear understanding of Naamah. And I think that disturbs a lot of people.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
So there's no one clear answer. It's really unfortunate, but the texts don't really say how and why she became what she became. But what she is a very powerful entity, and she works very closely with Lilith.
Okay. No, understood. All right. So what I want to do now, Val, so we have enough time, I want to make sure we leave enough time to get you some questions. Again, I'm going to start in the chat. I'm going to the top, just so listeners know, just so they don't think I'm not handpicking. I'm not jumping around. I'm going straight in order. So be patient. If you typed your questions in later at the bottom of the chat, obviously that'll come a little down the line. I'm just going to go to the top, start from the top, ask questions on that. And if you want to come in again, just type in the chat that you want to come in live and ask Bao a question. So the first question, Bao, is from Ritual Spirit. And the question, we talked a little bit about this, but maybe you can go elaborate a little bit more. I think you kind of answered this a little bit. The question is, how do you feel that the demons of the Hebrew tradition parallel with the gods of the Sumerian/Babylonian tradition? And do you feel they are connected? I know you kind of elaborated on it, but maybe we can synchronize personally some of those Sumerian demons, and in your research, what you've connected them with in the Hebrew.
Okay, that's a really good question, and what that question shows me is the state of affairs in the occult community regarding the difficulty in sort of discerning the difference between the demonic and the deity aspects of the ancient Sumerians and the Mesopotamians. As we know, the Hebrews, and by extension the Christians, and by extension the Muslims, consider any type of deity outside of their own realm to be demonic.
Right.
So yes, there is an absolute connection between them, but when you really think about it, and as I said in the latest book and in my book, I have two books on Canaanite deities, one on Asherah and one on Baal, that I said those are biased interpretations. So when people in the occult look at Baal, for example, and we look at Baal Brit, we look at Baal Zvu or Beelzebub, or Asherah and Ashtaroth, and all of these names, in the Bible, they are considered to be somewhat demonic, yes. And that was later interpreted by Christians who then, occultists then took on that information. Now, the problem is in their own religion, in Canaanite religion, Baal and Asherah are not demons. They are not demons. They've never been demons. So all these entities that we call demonic in the occult, especially those that are derived from biblical tradition, are not true classified demons. That's because correct. They're biased. They're called demons because it's against their tradition. And I made that very clear in my book, The Baal, the Lord of the Heavens. I made it very clear that Baal is not a demon. He is, in the Jewish tradition, yes. In the Bible, he's a demon, but that's because they're against the Canaanites. But if, when you really think about it, the Canaanites had just as much validity in their religion as the Hebrews did. So the Baal, to them, Baal was a high god. Mm-hmm. So yes, there is a relation to them, but I will tell you, any demon name that is derived from a Sumerian god, a Canaanite god, an Egyptian god, they are not quote-unquote demons. They became demons, or rather they were understood to be demons because those people were against them. Correct. So that's all things. So no, Baal is not a demon. Ashtaroth is not a demon. Even Molech is not a demon. Chemosh is not a demon. None of them are demons when you look at their original religions. But yes, biblically they are. And if you believe in the Bible, then you will believe they're demons. But if you don't believe in the Bible, they're not demons, because in their own religions they were not. Right.
Okay, great. All right, the next question is from Akpan Faku. And he's just asking, could one interpret the term, when you hear that term, the face of God, could that be symbolically referring to the pineal gland of an individual. I know that's open for a wide interpretation, but that's basically the question. What's your thoughts on that? Could one interpret it that, or?
Yeah, that is, like you indicated there, it's a very wide open question here. It really, it obviously depends on the concept that you're using, but if you are to believe that the face of God is something that is internally existent inside of the human being, that we all have, I would say, aspects of God in us.
Correct.
Then absolutely, the pineal gland, which is the central master gland, would contain those aspects. So
right.
The answer is yes and no. It's yes if you believe in that way, which I do have a strong belief that we are all part of this underlying force. So whether it's the pineal gland or not, I do believe that we have that essence in us, and I think it's actually embedded into our DNA. Right. It's even beyond the pineal gland. It's like literally in our skin. It's in our blood. It's in our fingernails. It's in our hair. It's in our breath.
Right.
That it's all indicated inside of us. So yes, I would have to agree that it probably does mean that if you want to take it into that direction.
Right.
Yeah, I don't see a problem with that.
Okay. This is a good question here, and I've had many discussions over the years in many different circles with this one. So I'm going to read it. This is from Rainer Reigns, and it says, too many, they correlate the subconscious mind and the human brain. So when the human brain dies and rots, what happens to you, AKA subconscious mind / creator essence? And I think this is something all of us wonder about, in that mystery of death. Your thoughts and research on this, I mean.
Yes. That's another amazing question, sort of in many ways related to the previous one.
Correct.
Yes, I do think that the subconscious mind, and we use that term, and I use the term also very loosely in my own work, because it's a very hard concept sort of to get your hands around, So the subconscious mind, in my opinion, is the conduit of pretty much everything that occurs in our life, and from the very mundane to the very spiritual. So when we do rituals, or when we do meditation or hypnosis or things like that, what we're doing is we're actually tapping in to the subconscious mind. So I actually feel that the subconscious mind is a term that we use to as a sort of like a catch-all term, but really, what I think the question is saying is the subconscious mind more than the brain? But at the same time, are they asking, is the subconscious mind sort of the soul, or like sort of the spirit of a person?
Right.
And I would say that it's sort of a little bit of everything. I think that the subconscious mind is the receiver of this energy, but I think that we're comprised of and made of things that are even beyond the subconscious mind.
Right.
So like the subconscious mind is an instrument that I don't think necessarily dies. I think it moves on, but not in the sense like a soul. I think it's like a almost like an energy type of field. I mean, there's this term that Rupert Sheldrake came up with called the morphic field.
Yes.
And sometimes he calls it the morphic resonance, is this energy that sort of exists across many different times and people based on experiences that everyone has. And so I think that the subconscious mind is sort of part of this morphic field, but I think that even the subconscious mind is informed by something bigger, by something greater.
Right.
And we can call that the soul, we can call it the spirit, we can call it whatever. So I think the subconscious mind is just one step in the evolution.
Right.
But it's not the end all be all. There's much more than that.
Correct. And there was a movie when you mentioned that concept with the morphic field and stuff, but I don't know if you've seen it, but I just want to also throw it out there for listeners. That kind of tried to show that. There was a movie a couple of years ago that came out with Johnny Depp called Transcendence, where it's kind of showing you how this consciousness continues to exist and how you're able to tap into it, even though after the individual has physically transitioned on. It was an interesting movie. I don't know if you saw it, Val, but I also wanted to just put that out there for listeners. I thought it was an interesting movie. It kind of tries to give you an idea of that. All right, but that was a good question. All right, so the next one, let me scroll up. Oh, this is a good question. This is from John. It's kind of a question / statement. And I personally think it's perception, but what really is, what is really evil? In behavioral psychology, we define evil as an action, not a person. Your thoughts on that? Because that can be a religious term. Some people kind of can get sucked into.
Yeah, I would agree with this. I would say that evil is evil, and any type of value judgment is definitely based on perception. For example, I could, let's look at the concept of attraction. Okay, like certain people are attracted to certain things, right? So we have people of a certain island, and I don't have the name, but I can get it for you, where they sharpen their teeth. Okay, so they sharpen their teeth, so all their teeth are like sort of fangs, and the women of this tribe find that extremely attractive in a male. Now, what does that say? But to us in the West, we would look at that and we would be like, oh my God, that's gross, or that's horrible. So what does that say? That says that everything, almost everything, is a matter of perception. To them, that is very attractive. To the modern male or female, they would look at that and they would be like, that's weird. And they smile and they have all facts, So it's all about perception. I mean, look at the, I believe it's the Aztecs or the Mayans, that they had a ritual that was sort of similar to sort of basketball, right?
Right. Where
the winning team would be sacrificed to the god. So literally, they're looking to die. They're looking to die. Okay. So the things that they want to win this in order to be sacrificed to the god. So, but into our perspective, they would be like, "Oh my God, that's ghastly. I don't want to die."
Right.
But they wanted to die. So what does that say? That says perception.
Right.
So to us, when the Christians saw this, they were like, "Oh my God, this is abomination. This is evil." But to them, it was not evil. So yes, good and evil are perceptions. Okay, they are. How we conceptualize it is a perception. People listen. There's some people who like to get their asses whipped during sex, right? But then there are those who don't like that and said, "Oh my God, that's painful. That's horrible." What is the difference? What is the difference between them?
That's
perception.
Right. Perception. That's 100%.
That's all it is.
That's right.
So yeah. So okay. I mean, look. God forbid all of these nations that have done horrible atrocities. Where they were committing genocide of all sorts of types and just horrible, horrible things. But in their mind, they weren't doing horrible things.
Correct.
In their mind, they were doing what they thought was the right thing.
That's right.
And that's not condoning their behavior. It's not. But what it's showing me and what it tells the world is that people do have different conceptions of what is right and what is wrong. And so, yeah, so it's good and evil are essentially perceptual.
Right.
You know, that really is the base of it.
Right. Appreciate it. I've got a live question for you. Brother Taza, you are on the call. You have a question for Brother Baal Kadmon.
How you doing, Brother Baal Kadmon? What's up, Brother B?
Okay.
Hey, so my question is, in your research and your ability to really dig into the language, when in the story of Adam and Eve in the land of Nod, is there any further information that you would attribute to that may not be, that's just coming out of the English in the mention of the land of Nod, and how would you interpret that esoterically? Like, what kind of realm do you think that would be?
That is a great question. In the end, the land of Nod, I think that's where Cain was sent to. That's a very good question. In the Kabbalah, there's an indication that land of Nod was sort of like a kind of like proto, I guess you could say purgatory, and I don't like to use that term because I don't think it's actually accurate. There's not a lot about the land of Nod, at least not in the Kabbalistic sense of the word. And again, this is where Cain was thrown into. So there's a term in Hebrew called navanad, and navanad means to and fro. And so what the implication of that is that it was sort of like a waste, almost like a no man's land. And so if we wanted to look at that in a esoteric way, we could look at that as a type of, I guess you could say, dark night of the soul, a sort of desolate land where Cain was sent to. And he was sent there, and he had the signs that he would not be killed, that he was going to be sent there. But really, when you think about the Hebrew term navanad, what you get is this sort of understanding that it is a type of purgatory, a type of place in our lives where we have to find ourselves, where we are experiencing this sort of middling path. It's not good, it's not evil, it's sort of like this neutral purgatory term. So there's no outright esoteric idea of it, but if you want to look at it in that way, the term in Hebrew navanad is perfect because it is to and fro. So literally, Cain was thrown into an existence of uncertainty, of not knowing where he's going, what is happening. And so I guess if you want to look at it as something that is personal, that could be like our dark night of the soul, the part of our lives when we go through that we don't know what's going on. Why is everything going wrong for us? But at the same time, things are still okay, but we're in this middling path that we can't seem to get out of. And I think that if we want to look at it from Cain's perspective, that's what Nod was. He was out of the Garden of Eden. He was out of even the outer ring of Eden, which was still sort of peaceful, even though Adam had to, plant things and all that stuff. But he was in Nod, so he was in like no man's land. And that's essentially what it is.
Right. And to connect to your question, Taza, Brother Baal, I know we talked a little bit about this last time. In your research too, that the mark, what it is, the mark that was placed upon Cain's head, symbolic of. Now, I know I brought this up briefly last time. I don't think we elaborated on it. When it talks about that the mark be put on his head, so no one would touch him or harm him. And when you read the so-called biblical history, doesn't really allude to who those people in the land of Nod were. Now, I know I brought up briefly, you mentioned in your book the story in Genesis chapter 4 about the Nephilim, or the giants, and how they came down to earth and came into the daughters of men and produced children. And we had brought up the concept, any connection or correlation in any other text, I would say outside of the Bible, because again, the Bible doesn't tell you who these so-called people in Nod would be that Cain would have to, fear.
Well,
yeah.
The people of Nod were not part of the Nephilim, because remember, the Nephilim came after Cain.
Right.
So the people in Nod were from the first creation story of Genesis. Remember, we have two creation stories in Genesis. We have where God says, God created man and woman.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then later on, he created Adam and Eve.
Correct.
So the first creation story, and of course, it's also in English, it can be found. What the Hebrew scholars say is that first Genesis story was an indication of the creation of humanity, okay? And the second creation story was pinpointing specific individuals, so like Adam and Eve.
Mm-hmm.
But so the people of Nod were those people that were created in the first creation story.
Okay.
So that's where those people are from. So that's why when people say, oh, well, Adam and Eve, how did they have children? How did Cain and Abel have their own children? Did they have sex with Eve? No, they did not. Because in the first part of Genesis, it says God created man and woman.
That's correct.
And that first creation story, what is understood is that people were created. There were other people. And the second creation story was just pinpointing one, Adam and Eve. But the first creation story clearly states man and woman was already created. So there were people there.
Right.
There was no incest understood to have happened at that time. But because in English it's sort of hard to get a grasp of that, but in Hebrew it says pretty clearly. I mean, it does in English too, but I think that what happens is that people forget that there's actually two Genesis stories in the book of Genesis.
That's correct.
And so they make it into one story. But it's actually two different stories. One is the general creation of man and woman, and the second is the discussion of one particular man and woman, and or the first one. But the thing is that there were still others, and that's what the Jewish tradition says. Because Adam and Eve were the first, quote unquote, I guess you could say, templates for man and woman, but man and woman were already created,
right?
And that's where all that's where Cain got his wife from. Right. That's where, So that's really what that's about. There were other people, and it had nothing to do with the Nephilim, because the Nephilim came after Noah. Mm-hmm. So it's a different story altogether.
And just so people could reference, if you're not familiar, that first creation story is Genesis chapter 1, verse 26 to 28. And then when you get into the second chapter of Genesis, throughout the chapter where it talks about that second creation. Appreciate that question, Brother Taja. All right, so let's go back to the chat. All right, I know you mentioned a little bit in some of your work, but here's the question. What is the connection between, if you've done research on this, Hoodoo and Luciferianism? Do most Hoodoo practitioners know the God that they are really calling on? At least those who are religious and practice magic. Your thoughts on that, if any?
So just to clarify, are they asking on the nature of Lucifer? What are they asking? Well,
I mean, I'm gonna, and again, Pixie Magic. If there's something you type later, I would assume the connection, because Luciferianism obviously deals with tapping into the power of what Lucifer is and what Lucifer represents. So I would probably assume yes. And any connection between that and hoodoo? I don't know if they're really.
You see, that is a very interesting question, and I see where they're going with this.
Mm-hmm.
I guess the first thing is, I guess this is the gorilla in the room here. As recently I released 2 video podcasts about the concept of Lucifer.
Yes, and they were very good videos.
As it pertains to the biblical tradition, and I make it clear that it's the biblical tradition, and I'm not saying that Lucifer does not exist. I'm just saying that Lucifer as this fallen angel is not exactly an accurate portrayal.
Right.
But as a Roman god, yes, he is Venus. It's different. So I just wanted to clarify that, because I think a lot of people have mistaken my podcast as being that Lucifer himself does not exist. And I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that the whole fallen angel thing does not apply to Lucifer.
Correct.
But anyway, and I'm not going to get too deep into that now. If they want, they could see it on my YouTube channel. There's the 2 most recent videos. But but if we are going to look at hoodoo, for example, which does incorporate aspects of, I could say, Catholicism, then yes, I mean, there is some type of connection that Lucifer can be brought into the hoodoo tradition. I don't believe that he is directly mentioned in it, but I believe that you can make some connection to it, because hoodoo, which I love, actually, the one thing that I love about hoodoo is that it is a very eclectic.
It is.
Very eclectic concept. So they're bringing in many aspects of different ideas and different belief systems. It is in many ways sort of like an Afrocentric, African American type of religion, which I love. I actually very much love hoodoo, and I'm actually writing something, but it'll be published sometime in a few years, actually. About it. So yes, there is some connection, but again, it's what they call syncretic. So it's a syncretism, but he himself within the hoodoo tradition probably doesn't exist as an individual, as a standalone being, but a being that was sort of included into the system.
Correct.
So in that way, he's an included being, and that's pretty much what we know at this point.
Right. All right. Appreciate it. Okay. We talked about that. Okay. Your thoughts on this? And again, I know when we were talking about there's so many parallels to the ancient Egyptians and the story, again, with the biblical Israelite story. I know you hashed through it earlier, and I think we went through that well, but a question back in reference to that from what we were talking about a little bit earlier. Your thoughts on John Tyson. Some historians consider Pharaoh Akhenaten, was Moses. I've heard that before. I don't know how your thoughts and any research on that. Have you correlated that to any data that you have researched?
Sure. The person who made that idea very popular was actually Sigmund Freud.
Yes.
Sigmund Freud made, he had a book called, I think it was Akhenaten, and Moses and the Problem of Maas. I forgot the exact name of his book. I think it was Moses and Monotheism. I think that was the name of the book. And in it, he equates, as he spelled it, and that's how they spelled it back in the days, Akhenaten, but it's Akhenaten, as being related to Moses in some way. Now, that is, first of all, that's a very problematic connection because there's no direct connection to it. There are some people that try to make the connections, like Asman and Robert Feather, who sort of try to create this connection, but they're not very solid connections. But is it possible that the idea of monotheism informed some people in that region because of Akhenaten? Maybe. It is possible. But just to be clear, Akhenaten wasn't necessarily a monotheist. He was what they called a henotheist. And what that means is that, yes, he believed in one God, the Aten. Okay.
Right.
But he didn't say that the other gods didn't exist. He just said that the Aten was the God.
Correct.
Okay? And so, there's no proof that his people were necessarily the Exodus, the people of the Exodus, because some people do say that. They said once they moved to Amarna, when he left Amarna, because he died, they don't know what happened to him. Remember, King Tut actually was his son.
Mm-hmm. Right.
When they left Amarna, supposedly that was the Exodus, and then they all moved to the east, and that's where like the Dead Sea Scrolls, and they said the Copper Scroll was part of his legacy. There's no direct historical way to prove that, and I know that Osman Assam tried to do that, and it was interesting. It was interesting, but I don't think there's a solid connection. I think maybe ideologically, as Freud tried to prove with Akhenaten, that there was some type of connection, but historically and archaeologically, it's a little tenuous. And I wouldn't throw my weight into that particular fight because I just think it's not substantial enough. But it is interesting, and I think it should be explored. But there's just not enough to grab on just yet on that.
Let me ask you a question, because there's also in relationship to Akhenaten. What's your thoughts? I've read in certain scholars have come with the theory he was very androgynous. Some have even gone as far to say he was hermaphrodite, because you do see some depictions of him. He does have a broad masculine face, but kind of like a curvaceous body, like a female. Your thoughts on that? Any connection?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. I mean, there are a lot of opinions on that, and one of the main opinions is that he may have suffered from something called Morphon syndrome. And so Morphon syndrome creates a situation where fat is sort of deposited in a certain way that might make the male figure to be a little bit softer and a little bit more feminine in its depiction. It is a birth defect, and the shape of his head, including the shape of the head of his son, who was King Tut, by the way. King Tut was his son. Showed that there might have been some type of deformity. And the reason why such a thing would even be entertained is because the Egyptians were known to do that. The Egyptians were known to inbreed not because they were perverts, so they were into incest, but because they felt they needed to keep the dynasty in the family.
Correct.
And they had no conception of inbreeding and the possible side effects of genetic, any type of genetic defects that would occur. And this is what happened with King Tut, because when they found King Tut, he married his own sister. So
Correct.
The thing is that when in his burial tomb, they found two of his children that were stillborn. They were stillborn because they had birth defects. So it's possible that Akhenaten suffered from some type of birth defect That is the most common example, but there is something very interesting about that, is that his earlier depictions did not show those defects. So the question is did his family try to hide it? So that was Amenhotep III, I believe, was his father.
Right.
Was he trying to hide it? Because in some of the quote-unquote family pictures, which was just, etches in stone, he was not in them. Not in all of them.
Right.
But he was in one of them, and he was depicted normally. So could it be that he just had a birth defect, they were ashamed of it, they didn't put him, and the only reason why he became Pharaoh is because the older brother died.
Right.
And so, so it is possible that he had some type of birth defect, and it would make sense because his children clearly had that as well, and their grandchildren died of it. So it's probably a birth defect of some sort.
All right. The next question from out of the blue: can you clarify anything on the 2 Enochs and the 2 Lamechs?
Okay. That is also a very good question. And these are they're technically, according to the Jewish text, technically, they're actually sort of the same person. It's not that there's 2 different ones. It's the same one. But this is where the inconsistencies in the Bible show, where we have stories that overlap one another, discussing the same individuals.
Correct.
But they're uneven, they're irregular. And so there's no clear description as to why there are 2 of each of these names. It is understood that they are the same, but there's some interpretation as to why one is this way and one is that way. It's sort of like this example. And this is one of the biggest discrepancies in the Bible. Of course, it's not present in English, in most English translations, but it is present in Hebrew. For example, we have the story of, and this will tie in exactly with the Enoch and Lamech, is we have David, right, who is the one who killed Goliath, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so we have, David did his thing, the slingshot killed Goliath. But then a few verses later, it says that Jonathan killed Goliath. So, but that's what it says in English. But in Hebrew, it says something else. So we have this story of who killed Goliath then, because it says, in Hebrew it says David killed Goliath, Jonathan killed Goliath. But in English, they added brother. So Jonathan killed the brother of Goliath. But in Hebrew, it doesn't say that. It says Jonathan killed Goliath.
Correct. And
so did David. Right. So who killed Goliath? So in English, they had to reconcile that. So they said, oh, well, you know what? No, Jonathan killed the brother of Goliath. But it doesn't actually say brother of Goliath in Hebrew. So the rabbi said, well, it's actually the same person. That David and Jonathan are the same person. So that is their explanation for Enoch and Lamech. They are the same people, just different stories. I find that to be a very inadequate argument, because I feel that that's just their way to sweep up the inconsistency in the story.
Right.
So they're technically the same, but they probably aren't. They're probably 2 different stories that just sort of came together, and the redactors they didn't know what to do with it, or they just missed out on it. Because if you read, again, that David and Jonathan's story, it is so blatantly contradictory. How they could have left that in the Bible is astounding. is just absolutely astounding. So these things do occur. So I would say that that's chalked up to two different stories, just like there's two different Genesis stories. There's two stories of everything sort of mixed in, and some of them just stayed in. So I don't think there's a profound explanation. I think this was probably a redactor's mistake.
Okay, makes sense. And again, Brother Baal, I know we're close till 10. I'm just going to try to take a few more questions, and if you got to go, you just let me know. I don't want to overkeep you. We got a few more minutes, so I'll try to squeeze just a couple more in. Maybe we'll just take 2 or 3 more, and then I'm sure we'll get you back here. I know you're busy.
Sure.
I know we'll get you back here in the future. Any thoughts on? This is from. Hold on, things skipped on me. Give me 1 second. I gotta scroll back up. I lost it. Where did it go? Okay. Dr. Root Magic. I have heard this concept in some occult circles. Any I don't know if there's concrete evidence for this either, but they have said in some occult circles that Enoch was possibly transformed into the angel Metatron. Your thoughts on that? I don't know how accurate that is, but I have heard that in some circles. Are you familiar with that, or your thoughts on it if you are?
Yeah, I mean, there is indication in the Hebrew tradition that Enoch and Metatron are the same being. The exact reason why the transformation occurred is not 100% clear, but there is indication that they are, in fact, one and the same. And I do cover that in my book, The Watchers and Their Ways, but I don't go too deep into that because the gist of that book was more about the Watchers. But there is some tradition that does state this, and at the same time, that tradition has spawned a whole bunch of other ideas,
correct,
that are not correct. For example, they say, okay, Enoch and Metatron, which just means behind the throne. Metatron in Greek is behind the throne, which means that he's almost like the second hand of God. That's really what Metatron means. And Enoch was elevated to that status. But then after that idea came into being, we had all these weird ideas about the Metatron cube and all of these things that are not written anywhere in the Jewish tradition. That it's not written anywhere. The Metatron cube is a New Age invention. Just for people to know, because I think that's where things lead when people say, "Oh, it's Enoch Metatron," and then there's a whole bunch of beliefs around Metatron. Right. But there is no Metatron cube, at least not as far as the original texts are concerned.
Right.
But yes, there is a tradition that Enoch is Metatron. The exact moment of transformation is not exactly 100% clear, but yes, that does exist. It is something that does exist in a tradition.
Okay. All right, then we'll take this last one here. This is a good question, and the question is from Blair Jones. Does the Qlipothic aspect answer as to why, when we were talking about Naamah and her attributes, and when you were describing her, so she's essentially asking, does the Qlipothic aspect describe her attributes like that if the Kabbalah doesn't? I found it yes, but your thoughts on it?
Well, I mean, because Naamah is part of the structure of what the Kabbalah calls, not the left-hand path, but they call it the left emanations. Mm-hmm. She is part of that structure. So she is not a particular Qlipah. Qlipah is the singular.
Correct.
But she is also an embodiment of the Qlipoth. So you can't say that she's a particular Qlipah, but she is sort of like Lilith and Samael, mm-hmm, in the sense that she is an embodiment of the Qlipoth. But right, but there's nowhere to say that she's directly a Qlipah, mm-hmm, but she is, in the sense that she is associated with Lilith, and Lilith is her matron, and she essentially works for Lilith, according to. So she is essentially part of the Qlipoth, because we have to understand that Qlipoth, the term, has a very wide base of meaning. Qlipoth is essentially anything that, we can create it through our quote-unquote our misdeeds. Everything that is sinful, everything that is base, that is quote-unquote against God, is a derivation of Qlipoth. So when she seduces the men in her sphere, she is just like Lilith. She is the queen of the Qlipoth. And so, so she is very much tied to the Qlipoth because she is part of the structure of it. Okay. She is a result of the Qlipoth, let's put it that way.
Gotcha. All right. Brother Baal, I know you're extremely busy. I appreciate you spending a little bit over 2 hours with us tonight. Again, I want to throw out there the book. I'm going to put it on the screen again. In addition to his many books, he's authored a lot of books. I know a lot of the listeners, you're very familiar with him. If you're new tonight, tuning in for the first time, and you may not be familiar with Brother Baal Kadmon, I definitely check out his website, baalkadmon.com. Right here, the book you see on the screen right now, this is his newest book that he just recently released. Again, Devils, Demons, and Ghosts in the Hebrew Tradition, Romancing the Sitra Achra. He does have another book on Lilith magic. A lot of the information that it branches out to, he'll make reference to some of it in it. He does have individual books on some of these topics exclusively. So I would just suggest you Google him on Amazon. All his books will come up. Go to his website. And in parting, Baal, any closing thoughts before we let you go?
Well, I just want to thank you all for hosting me on this podcast, and I really enjoy it, and I'm so happy that people are so engaged and interested in these topics, because they're so important for us. And I think that, when we can get in depth into these topics and look at their original languages, we can learn so much more. So I'm really happy, and I thank you all for the support of my work, and I do appreciate it very much, more than you can imagine.
All right, Baal, and I will definitely be in touch, and hopefully we'll get you back here maybe in another month or so, schedule permitting. I'll touch base with you, see what it's looking like down the road. I know you're busy writing, and I know you travel a lot, but I'll definitely reach out to you, and we'll see when we can get you back here in the future.
All right, great. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so we'll stay on just for a little bit longer. I'll see if we can get to some of these other questions. But what I wanted to throw out there, keep in mind, this is an interesting topic because, again, we're not focusing quote unquote the Bible as a 100% factual book or document, where what we're trying to do is show the history and origins, and I think Baal's book does that great. Via the Hebrew tradition, that these demonic energies really, in essence, have been there prior to all this religious biblical stuff, because when you really look at it, it's pointless to sit here and argue the literalness of the Bible, because as we were just talking about earlier, we know it's a conglomeration of many stories from cultures that predated it. I know some people have brought up earlier about the Sumerian tablets, the Atrahasis, the Enuma Elish, and you will see those similar stories and similar characters, and that's not a coincidence. So again, it'd be pointless to sit here and even fuss and debate over the accuracy of it. I think all of us being on this path know that that's just irrelevant and bullshit. But I think if you are, as Baal said, he comes in this book and much of his work, he comes from an academic perspective. So if your interest is just looking into it from more of an academic perspective, it's good knowledge and information to have just in your everyday travels and dialoguing with other people. I've always find this type of information to the average religious theologian kind of mystifies them, because we've all run into them, and they're all pretty much programmed to teach things a certain way. They go to these places called seminaries where the mentally dead reside, just like in the cemetery, and they're programmed. So it's just good information to have. But again, working with the Kabbalah or the Kabbalah, however you want to pronounce it, if that is your field of interest, and that's why this month I've been going hard on, the demonic abode, the void and the darkness, and tapping in to these demonic energies. But remember, when we leave the literal aspect of it, and the important thing for us as adepts and magicians of how we incorporate this personal and ritualistically in our personal work, right? And that's why there was a few things I had asked Brother Baal to give the esoterical breakdown. I think he gave some really good information with the Jacob story, for an example. And that's what we have to learn to do on this path, is how do we apply these concepts to ourselves, and how do we utilize this? And I've always looked at that story, and I have read and seen what Brother Baal has in his book, where they say that he actually wrestled with this angel, and this angel was Samael. And some people misinterpret it, and they think it's this biblical God, and it's really not. It has nothing to do with that. But I think the bigger point to look at in that story is really the struggle that we deal with, or what we struggle with within ourselves, getting ourselves right? And it's an ongoing process. And one thing I want to point out that Baal said, and Dr. Edward Bruce Bynum said it almost same thing identically last Thursday night. Shadow work is not easy, people. And he said something that I hope, if you didn't catch anything else tonight, just because you acknowledge it, and this is what I mean when I say people just throw out random, you got to deal with your bullshit, you got to deal with your shadow work, you got to deal with your dark side. Just because you acknowledge it, just as you heard Brother Baal say, and I've said the same thing for many years, it doesn't mean shit. If you're not actually applying techniques and working on it, it's irrelevant. And it is not easy. Don't let nobody fool you. Don't let nobody bullshit. And I think if we're all on this path, and if you think it is, then obviously I don't think you really understand what it is, because it's an ongoing work. It's a process. It's something that you're going to have to work with, and deal with on a regular basis. It's not something that you're simply gonna overcome, as we were talking about earlier, by just simply acknowledging it. And it's important. And that's what I mean when you hear me talking about all the time. Don't get caught up in the catchphrases like these other groups do. They got the lingo down, they got the catchphrases, they're saying the right things. But there's no results there. And at the end of the day, what this path is about essentially is getting results. That's how you know you're doing the right things. We can't get caught up in the likes and the dislikes. This is one of many paths, what we're discussing tonight. Is this going to resonate with everybody? No, if this is not your thing, it's not your thing. If you're not really interested in going into the, some of the historical and the academic data of demonology and the occult, and this just may not be a path for you, and that's okay. As I've said many times before, there's going to be many things you resonate with, gravitate towards, that you're really going to have an interest in. There's going to be many things you're not feeling, and that's okay. That's fine, because remember, as I've said many times before, that's the whole point of you being the sole ruler and governor of your spiritual sovereignty. There is no set guide or tell-all. So just important things to consider. And I thought the comment about the shadow work, or the shadow self, and correlating that to the Jacob story, that's powerful if you really know how to apply it. I'm going to see if there's any other questions in here. Try to get through the rest of this. For a little bit more, and then we'll wrap it up. I know there was somebody had asked a question earlier. I was talking about on Tuesday night's YouTube video about specters. There's not really many books out there on them now. They're mentioned scattered. Alan Kardec's Spiritism Book of Spirits. You might want to look into that. A lot of that tradition is passed in certain circles from mouth to ear. There is information in books. You can Google it. It's going to give you surface stuff as far as how to work with them and be aware and the awareness. As I said on Tuesday night's video, that really comes with your own personal discipline and work. Once you are connected and linked in and you've done the work, automatically your inner awareness is there. And when it does happen or you connect with one of them, you just know. And it's hard to put into words and describe an action that you get or a feeling that happens from it. So it's not really something that can be, explained via books. It's more of a spiritual thing, for lack of a better word. But there is information out there scattered offhand. I don't know really any books offhand myself. I'm not saying that it doesn't exist that exclusively deals with the topic, but you will find it scattered. I know Alan Kardec's The Book of Spirits is he mentions them, or he goes into them a bit in there in dealing with the system of spiritism, which is the whole process of working with spirits in general. So that's kind of the direction I would kind of point you in. It's just it's kind of one of those things you learn, on the fly is the best way I could describe it. It's one of those type of things, unfortunately. Okay, what else we got? Let's see if there's anything else here we missed. Out of the blue, there are many good books on ancestry work. It just depends what perspective you're going with. There's many books, the Ifa or West African tradition, if that's the route you're going. One book on the left-hand path that I find from a left-hand path perspective, and it does incorporate very similar or some of the aspects of the African ancestral, methodology, the Black Ship that we've mentioned here many times on the show. Author's name is Malthus. There's a whole section on the ancestors from a left-hand path perspective, how to set up altars, how to propagate them. And remember, we don't worship our ancestors. I just want to make that clear, just in general for those that might be listening, because there's a term that's always used that I'm not really too crazy about, ancestral worship. We don't worship anything on this path. We are the highest deities on this path. We are the chief god and goddess of this path because we're in control. So we don't give worship to anything outside of ourselves. We don't grovel down, bow down, and pray to things outside of ourselves. I just want to make that crystal clear. Ancestral work or working with the ancestors, and I'm glad you labeled it that way, out of the blue, ancestry work, is we show honor and reverence to those connected to us by blood. Because you can't worship yourself, as I've said many times before. That's a part of your DNA. You're acknowledging that. You're showing the honor, respect, and reverence. It's very important to understand doing ancestry work, as I've mentioned many times before in the past. Not all of your ancestors are positive, productive people. Fact of the matter is, some of them were, possibly murderers, rapists, criminals, drug addicts, winos. This is a reality. So you definitely want to, skill yourself in the area of working with that. And, the awareness, so people have brought up all those concepts of specters, trick the spirits, how to be aware of the ones that are not, let's per se, for your growth. You'll know that when you're doing your work via the consistency of that work, because the level of awareness is naturally raised. Again, it's not something I could really put into words. It's something that one must experience. But I would say one of the best books, in my opinion, on it. Obviously, the Black Ship, the entire book isn't on that. But if you're looking more so from a left-hand path perspective, minus all of the kind of religious aspect of it, there's another good book. I don't have. Hold on, let me see if I can grab it. I think I might have it here. I found this to be the best one from the African spiritual perspective. Let me see if I have it over here. Hold on. Okay, just to throw this one out here. This is a really good book, a simple book. This is something I started using a while back. I think it came out, hold on, what's the year? It came out early 2000s, late 90s, I believe. You might have to go directly to the website. I think it's Athela Henrietta Press. Anyway, this book came out in 1999, and it's called Ancestors, Hidden Hands, Healing Spirits for Your Use and Empowerment. It's by Min Ra Ifagbemi. He's a Babalawo. And so this comes from the West African tradition. This is a really good book. It gives you, again, kind of like the Black Ship does, how to set up altars, ideas on how to honor the ancestors. There's some aspects in here that might be a little religious that I probably wouldn't fuck with. But it shows you cleaning, smudging, setting up your altar, how to communicate with the ancestors. It gives you ideas, is basically what I'm saying. So if you're looking, it's a very simple book, not a complicated book. I think it's a great book. And it covers the basics of propagating and honoring your ancestors, all right? And again, I just put it up there one more time. That's the name of the book. I don't know if you can get it on Amazon because I think it might be out of print. You might have to find it. You might find it on eBay. You might find it on Amazon too. But I think the last time I checked, and things change all the time, when there's a limited amount of books, I'm going to Google it right now. When there's a limited amount of books, they tend to jack the price up, because they know that there's not many in circulation, so they'll jack the price up. But I just want to see. I hadn't checked in a while. Last time I checked, it wasn't. I could be wrong though. Let me just see. Okay, here it is, right here. I'm on Amazon right now. It's coming up. Let me see what they're selling it for on there. Shit, the fuck. Yeah, you see what I'm saying? Look at this bullshit. $400 on Amazon. You believe this shit? $400 for this damn book. That's because it's out of print. I think it's a hard book to get. I mentioned that a while back, and that's used for $399.98. What kind of crack are they smoking? Now, I mentioned that last time because I know it's a rare book. It's not an easy book to get. The website, which I don't know if you're going to have any luck on there either. Shit. Athela Henrietta. This is a rare book, and I mentioned it last time. I know when the last time I checked, I think it was like $199. You could actually, they have an email. I actually know this company. It's a company in Brooklyn, New York. They're on Nostrand Avenue, actually. Well, I'll give you the telephone number, 718-493-4500. Again, 718-493-4500. Good luck, though. I don't think you're going to have any luck with that. I know the book's been out of print for a bit. So, again, this is somebody online that has a couple of copies, and that's what they do. I didn't check eBay. You might want to check eBay. But I know it's a very good book if you can get your hands on it, all right? What else we got here? What else we got? I wouldn't say ancestry work is connected to just, in some aspect, past life regression. It could, in the sense, you inherit some of the things of past ancestors, that stuff can be genetically passed down. But I don't know if we could say straight up that it's fully connected to that, all right? Okay, what else we got? Yeah, it's a good question by John. Did the first creation of man and woman take from the tree of knowledge, or was it strictly Adam and Eve? No, it's the second creation when you read the story. I would suggest both people, again, if that's your interest. Again, going to the first chapter of Genesis, chapter 1, verse 26 to 28. Those beings that we were talking about earlier that were already here. No, that's not talking about them, because remember, when they partake from that tree, it said they became like one of them, the gods. Their eyes were open and they saw, and they were able to decipher between or perceive between right and wrong. So it's definitely according to the biblical story of the second. Okay, interesting comment by Raina Reigns. Let me elaborate a little bit more on it. Are we not gods and goddesses? Why restrict ourselves to this human experience? Why can't we experience being a planet or even a galaxy? I am more than this human crap. Very true, but the human aspect, there is a correlation to it, and let me explain. Some people can get too far gone and act as if they're human aspect of themselves, not to the point where they succumb, because remember, on this path we have a concept called the path of indulgence. In order to master your humanity, you must experience it to its fullest to master it. Suppressing it and tossing it aside and just saying that's human is not really understanding it. You're right, we are much more than this human existence. But I think some paths, and I'm expounding further, I'm not just referring to your comment. There's a lot of circles that teach you, I'm a god and I'm a goddess. Then first we have to establish from the individual, what's your definition of god or goddess? Well, simply a god or a goddess is somebody that's in control of their destiny, that makes decisions for themselves. They're not a conformist. Obviously, we're not talking about a monotheistic god, a spook god. We're talking about a living, breathing, walking, talking deity, God. That's what a true god or goddess is. But to master your humanity, you must indulge in it on some level. The bottom line is we're not going to just disappear out of here, because I'm expanding out further, because you have a lot of systems that tell you don't be in the world, don't be eluded by money, this and that. Well, then if that's the case, and we're so spiritually in tune like that, stop paying your motherfucking bills, and then we'll see what really happens. So what I'm saying is I agree with the statement 100%, but there's got to be that fine line between, reality, everyday reality, and not. Some people can get so engrossed in the spiritual realm that they lose sight of their everyday responsibilities, is what I'm saying. So it's a harmony between that objective and subjective realm. We got to make sure we have that function in harmony, because sometimes, and again, I'm not to just your comment, sometimes people use being so deep and spiritual or super spiritual to escape their everyday failures in life. And we got to make sure we're not doing it in that sense. So as long as we're not doing it in that sense, most definitely the goal is to tap into your divine powers, to tap into that godhood or goddessness, to become that divine being that you destined are. But I know, me personally, there is a physical and a mortal element to it, most definitely. Most paths will tell you not. I totally disagree. You can't master your humanity if you don't indulge in it on some level. Suppressing it and avoiding it and saying don't be in the world and this and that is not the answer or the solution. And especially on this path, there is an aspect, again, as I mentioned earlier, called the path of indulgence. When you indulge on a certain level, not indulge to the point where you're consumed by your indulgence. So I want to make that clear, but you indulge enough to experience them, to master them. That's what I'm trying to get at. So we do have to access that portion, of our existence. There is a human element to it, because if there wasn't, we wouldn't be sitting here in human form having this conversation on any level. So we're here for a reason. We're here to put all that in perspective. So as long as we function it and put it all together in that perspective, I'm in agreement with that. We do. That is the goal, but there's steps to it. All right. Pixie Magic. I have not watched that show yet. I've heard everybody's telling me I'm trying to get around to watching it, so I can't really speak on it because I don't know. I didn't see it. As far as the Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, so many people have emailed me, told me to watch it, check it out. I just have not got around to it, so I will try to do that. So I'm not going to speak on something I'm not familiar with. Okay, I'll check it out though. I'm definitely trying to get around to it. Okay, what else we got here? I know Blanc. I know that was a question for Baal. Maybe you could save that for the next one, so I won't address it. That's a good question. What else we got? Hold on 1 second. People think skipped. See if I can find the same spot. Hold on, give me a second. Thing jumped on me again. Oh man. Okay, here we go. I found it. It's a good comment by Akpan. If you feel that when you're doing it right, there's no way to eat a Reese's. And again, I always say, I know you just, it's a broad statement, but I've always said, remember, on this path, there is no such thing as a right or wrong way. The right way is the way that works for you. We have to understand that. And we also have to understand what might work for you may not work for another person. And so you can't force your way on somebody because it works for you. And vice versa. That individual can't force their way on them because it works for them. And that's the beauty of it. That's a Luciferian mindset. We understand from a Luciferian mindset and perspective, we know there's going to be a multi-dynamic aspect of how people are going to perceive things and work with them. And that's okay. And that's what makes it different from any other path. There is no right or wrong way. It's the way that works for you. And as I said before, people got to really start trusting in their spiritual intuition, the messages that they receive personally, that within reason. I'm not talking about, look, I'm not going to lie, there's some space cadets you will run into, you know, I'm not talking about the people that communicate with aliens and stuff. And, you know, maybe that stuff is true. I'm talking more on an internal, personal level. You know, don't diminish your power and your magic. As I said before, when, you know, people get an intuition to do something, they do it, they carry it out, they get results. Then they're looking for validation on it. You're completely diminishing your power. If you did it, you got the results. Leave it there. That's it. It's done. Don't question it. Don't go asking another person for validation. Did I do it right? Should I or should I have not done this or that? Well, why would you even ask that? You already got the confirmation. How did you get the confirmation? Via the results. There's your answer. But why do we have this inclination? I'm saying some of us that do. I'm just speaking to those that do. Why do we have this inclination like we need external validation from something? See, where I'm at, and I've mentioned this before, and many others that are similar, I don't have the urge or the desire to really feel the need to prove shit to anybody. It's pointless. All I care about is proving it to myself. If I'm getting results via the work I'm doing, there's my confirmation. I don't need to go to somebody else and convince them, hey, look, I did this. You should do it. And then they may not agree with it. Then we get into this back and forth nonsensical debate. You got to learn to get past that. That's what a lot of these other systems do. They try to enforce their way upon you. I don't try to enforce my way upon anybody. I'm not interested, to be honest with you, I couldn't give a fuck. I'm not interested in you know, what does not work for somebody or does, in the sense I'm more focused on what I need to do and what works for me. So I say all that to say, whatever works for you and you're getting results, don't question it. Just keep doing it. That's your answer right there. Now, it's different if you're struggling in some area and you're not getting the results and you're trying to figure out, am I doing this wrong? Any suggestions? That's a whole different story. I get that. But why would you question something when you got the confirmation and the answer via your results? I can't stress enough that diminishes your power as a magician, your spiritual power as a god or a goddess, You don't realize the energy that you bring to that just destroys and eliminates it from the power you originally gave it when you got the results. I can't even stress that enough. So that's something that the adept and the magician will struggle with at some points. More so, it should be in the beginning stages of their journey, but you shouldn't be dealing with that if you've been on this path for a while. You should have the ability to master that. And again, that's why I said we use that term at the end of ritualistic work, not like they do in high magic or middle paths or mysticism. And they say, so mote it be, right? So mote it be means I'm leaving it to this powerless energy that doesn't exist. And there's a probability it may not work out in my favor. That's really what so mote it be means. We say, so it is done when we finish ritualistic work, right? I've always told people to say that. You've probably seen it written in certain books. And if you've ever come down here and done a group ritual with us, we end our rituals with that all the time. Because when you're saying, so it is done, it's definitive, it's final. You're leaving it there. You're not second guessing it. And just by a simple, powerful statement like that, what it does is seal the power of your magical worth. Because if you understand invocations, performative utterances, it's very important to understand the power of that. Via your passion and energy that you put behind it is what gives fuel and life to those invocations, all right, to those performative utterances, to those statements that you make. It's one of the most powerful magical tools you will use, whether you're aware of it or not. So don't diminish your power by second guessing, all right? Let's see what else I got here. I'm skipping the personal conversation you guys have. I'm just trying to get to some questions if there's any, and then wrap it up. All right. This I do want to touch on, and I've touched on this, the power of music. I've suggested people do something I call music magic. You could tap in to all aspects of your life and the life of others via music. Because the power of music, the sound, the vibration, the tones of it can stimulate and awaken a certain awareness within you. Music can also open up vortexes where you're able to time travel, literally. What tends to happen is, and I've always used this example many times before in the past, everybody here can put this to the test right now as we speak. So I'm just going to say, think of a song from back in the day, whether it's a few years ago or all the way back to when you were a young child. Think of a song that you really, really loved and that you still hear it today or listen to it today, right? Once you get that song in your mind, right, I guarantee you the image becomes very vivid. To the point, then I would ask the person, do you remember the first time you heard that song? And they'll think and it'll come. Then it gets very vivid and detailed. Some will be able to give you the exact year it came out, what time of the season it was. It was summer, winter, spring, or fall. They might remember exactly, I was in 10th grade, 11th grade, I was in high school. The first time I heard it, I was out on the weekend. They might recall the exact spot they were at where they heard. It gets so vivid to the point they might remember what they were wearing when they recall, and they might have heard it at a house party or hanging out somewhere. They might remember exactly the relationship that they were in. I can go on and on and on. Music unlocks those energies. So as you mentioned it here, we're connecting with one that's deceased. I do that frequently too with my relatives. I'll play music that my father loved. And each song will open up, memories that connect you to certain aspects of your life. It could be holidays. It could be certain moments growing up. It could be certain particular situations you spent with them. Music has the ability to do that. We all can think of a song. And look, I've had people in the past over years call in live, and I've asked them this live and show them. And as I'm doing it with them, they're actually time traveling right there on the spot, whether they're conscious of it or not, literally. Because you can go back. Look, you could do it with any song. And here's the work I suggested people do. Here's what I did, and I found this to be very powerful. I think apps, and I have the Amazon Music app. There's so many apps out there now. I'm just using that as an example. I have created different playlists that correlate with different times of my life. I've made a R&B playlist, an old school R&B playlist till present, a hip hop playlist. I'll even connect some popular pop songs that were popular over the years growing up. I've created a list for that. As far as rock music is concerned, the only thing I ever really got into was some of the classic rock of the 70s, which that was some good music, and a lot of hip hop artists sampled it. Billy Squire's Big Beat, for an example. You know how many times that was sampled in hip hop? I might be here all night talking about that shit. I think I'm gonna do another show on the music thing soon. But I'm going to show you is I put them pretty much to the best of my ability in chronological order from a young child to the present day. And try taking portions of your playlist, sections at a time, and just sit down and listen to them in order and reflect. And focus on the memories that come to the surface when you play certain tracks and music. It's a powerful tool. Now, they say, and I say they say, in certain spiritual circles, when you listen to the music from the generation that you grew up in, it literally can heal aging cells. It can literally keep you young. So it's important that we do stuff like that and tap into that energy, because what it does is, you're going to tap into the happiest moments of your life. And that's what creates that healing energy, that quote unquote anti-aging process, right? Because sound and vibration can heal. We all know this. And that's the power and the science of music. Shit, the universe is constructed on harmonics. Come on. What do you think the Om chant is about? It's about the same frequency that the planet, the same amount of megahertz that the planet vibrates at. That's why the Buddhist monks do it in that tone and frequency. Because they know if they resonate with that, it takes them to higher states of consciousness. So music, sound, harmonics, look, like I said, harmonics is the glue to the universe. When you're tapped in it and linked in on that and vibrating with that in unison, look, there's a science behind that too, to being able to astral travel, right? Because we always talk about astral travel. What's one of the keys of astral travel? Well, your vibration and frequency must be sped up to a certain speed in order to create that separation of out of body, right? And it's done when you are in a certain state, right? Or when the chakras are aligned in a certain state so you could take flight. Music, look, I could be here all day talking about the power of music, and music is an integral part of our life, an integral part of our existence. Again, I can't even stress it enough. So I would suggest try that work, then play with it, do it however you want. But that's how I did it. I created multiple playlists. I categorized them by the genre of the music. And each one, it's amazing how each one stirs a certain amount of memories and emotions from them periods. I have stuff that goes back to the 60s and 50s that I heard my parents playing growing up, which connects me to a lot of my childhood memories. That's one aspect. And then I'll kind of take it up to when I started individually branching out and listening to my own music. It'll take me back to times and, in the neighborhood when I grew up in certain circles of friends, during the high school era, in my late teens. List goes on and on. It's some powerful shit. And this is how we really work magic on this path. This is what magic is about. Eliminate all that spooky bullshit. All that, conspiracy shit on the internet and movies and all that, can sensationalize it and give it to the practitioner give it to the anti-practitioner that's not on this path, a false illusion of it. All right. But music is powerful. All right. Let's see what else I have. All right. Owl Emanator from Australia. If you're still here, greetings. We appreciate you tuning in. And we will get Baal Kadmon back. Again, we have to be respectful. Try to just keep guests here for about 2 hours. I know they're busy, and I know he's extremely busy. So, we try to keep him in that 2-hour window. Same thing with like Dr. Bynum and other guests. If it was up to me, I would keep them longer. But again, we got to be respectful because they do have other things that they do. And I know a lot of you are familiar with his work. If you're not familiar with his work, I would encourage you to go out and get some of his books. And one thing I've always said, outside of his recent book, it's more, it's complex. It's not a simple read. I'm gonna be honest with you. This book right here is not a simple read. A lot of his other works are simple in the sense, not because it's basic. It's just he has a gift of conveying things in a very easy, simplistic way. Most of his ritual books are like that. This book is probably nowhere near that. It's his thickest publication that he's put out. And he seems to be now expanding and going that route. As he said, he's coming from more of an academic perspective. So if you're not familiar with him, check his work out. As you know, I've been mentioning him on the channel since day one. I've been using his books for several years now. Kali Mantra Magic is a great book. I love that book. I've done a lot of work out of that. I've gotten great results from using that book. If you're looking for a good book on Kali with some rituals in it that are not complicated, there's some great mantras in there that deal with, but I will say this, as I've mentioned many times before, working with Kali Ma, don't fuck with it if you ain't ready for it. And the reason why I'm saying that is it's definitely going to bring that intense change. Again, not the change you may want, the change you may need. And sometimes we get that confused. What we want and what we need are not the same thing. And sometimes we get a shock. We get a rude awakening because we're looking for one thing, the want, which is not the necessity in our lives at the time. And guess what comes instead of the want? The need. Kali brings you what you need. She don't give a fuck if it's what you think it is. Kali's going to bring what you need to get your ass correct. He goes a little bit into it in the book. He gives you the warnings. Be careful when you access the power of Kali. And those that have worked with Kali know what I'm talking about. And just like Lilith, Kali, these archetypes have much more to them than just the sexual nature that everybody, in my opinion, so oversaturates them with. And that's there. I'm not saying there's not a sexual goddess aspect to Lilith. Of course there is. And to Kali, of course there is. But there's so much more than that. The amount of power you can utilize or get from them as far as transforming and changing yourself is, I'd be here all night talking about it. But Kali will give you ass that rude awakening. So I caution you, be very prepared to be receptive to the change, whatever that may be. Could turn your life upside down, could change your career, your job, your social circles, etc. Because when you propagate Kali to bring me the guidance, especially the Om Cream Kali chant, which invokes her mantra, which invokes her power almost to the point of possession. Man, I can't even put that into enough of words of what can happen alone with accessing that aspect of Kali. It could literally turn your world upside down if you're not prepared for it. So I always tell people go into that type of work with the mindset of being receptive for change and abrupt, swift change. Okay. Where is it? John, no, I haven't had EA coding on my show. Maybe I'll reach out. Maybe that'd be a good, I'll look into it. All right, what else we got? Adam, there's a shaman that knows of these specters and holding a seminar tomorrow. I believe Shaman Dork. The cost is $35 to see the webinar, but maybe wealth. It could be, yeah. And again, you're gonna have to connect with it. Again, it's not really something that's heavy in book form. It's scattered out there. A shaman would definitely that's on a shamanic path, I would hope so, is familiar with them, because it is an aspect you're going to deal with. So that might be, a good venue or a good outlet to get more information. But yeah, again, it's one of those things, unfortunately, in my opinion, that you learn by experience and sometimes making a mistake, because mistakes are learning lessons, right? You will encounter them if you're doing any type of spirit work, working with demons, spirits, even with the Qlipothic tree. When you're opening yourself up to those energies, you will manifest them, and they will present themselves. But again, via your consistency, your work, and it creates that inner awareness. You just know when they're in your presence. You get a certain feeling. Inclination kicks in. Your intuition just says something isn't right. Something's not right here. And then you're able to command that specter to reveal its true self. And usually what happens is when you do that, because remember, they can read your subconscious mind. So you might be going into a work because you want to contact your grandmother. They can literally pick that thought from your mind and then take the shape and form of your grandmother via your thoughts. And now you think you have your grandmother standing in front of you when you got one of these specter spirits. But when you sense that and that spirit is standing in front of you, it's as easy as just simply making a command to the spirit to tell the spirit to reveal its true self. And it will dissipate, and then it will take form of what it really is. That's the best way I can describe it. That's literally, I'm describing literal experiences that I've had like that. And I'm sure many others will tell you they've had similar. It may not be identically the way I described it because it's personal. But that's the best way I can tell you. That's pretty much how it goes down, right? Anyway. Yeah, Michael W. Ford, which is funny you bring it up. I was actually in contact with him today. I've been trying for a while to get him on. The communication has been a little bit off, and the last time I had reached out to him, his schedule didn't permit. So I'm actually, I won't talk about it until I officially can get him on. I would like to definitely get him here. I've been working on that. And we mentioned we reference a lot of his books. One thing I like about Michael W. Ford, especially the second Mapet book, Necrominion, he goes thorough in connecting it, that really this path has its origin and essence connection to ancient Egypt and Africa. Even with vampirism, he takes it back to the pre-dynastic Egyptians and the dynasty of Pharaoh Moses as being one of the founding fathers of vampirism from a pure spiritual nature. And in essence, that's the origin of these practices. Left-hand path has its root in that. We know this, but we make a lot of reference to his books. And that is so true, Raina Range. Your own self-created demons are going to be your most powerful. And that's what doing demonic integration work is about. And you tap into that via your personal demon. And that's why you do that demonic integration work. And those will be more powerful in essence than any other demons or energies that you work with. And then those energies are just those other energies that everybody's familiar with are supposed to be the stepping stone to that. That's all. It's supposed to push you in that direction if need be. But again, it's about choice. Okay? You make your own personal choice. And again, rain or rains, it's personal. If the Lucifer isn't part of your path, remember, that's personal choice. And again, Lucifer is just one of the many archetypes. And it just represents that again, as I've said many times before, that intellect that we all seek. Because that's all it means is light bearer. A Luciferian is just trying to seek that intellect and that knowledge and wisdom. They're always on a quest for that knowledge and that wisdom. That's it. It just represents a certain aspect or archetype, and it's personal. That's all. It doesn't, like I said, there's going to be many paths you resonate with, many paths that you don't. And that's a good approach there, Akpan Faku. I'm open to many sources of information and methodology. I take what I need and then I discard what I don't. Exactly. You take systems, even when it comes to books. Like a lot of the books that I mentioned on here, I don't agree with everything in those books. Absolutely not. I do exactly what Akpan just described. Whatever resonates with me that I could utilize, but when I say utilize, I put my own personal touch and twist on it, especially if it's ritualistic work. That's what you're supposed to do as a god or a goddess. That's how you utilize information, be it books or whatever. You cipher out of it what resonates with you and what you want to utilize or what you gravitate towards. And whatever you don't, you just, as you use, just toss it aside. That's the correct approach. What else we got? Jumped on me again, people. Bear with me. Even this thing fucking jumps. Hold on, I'm trying to fuck it. Here's where I left off. All right. All right, just skipping through, see if there's anything else here. Blah, blah, blah. Okay. All right, I don't really see anything. Hold on. All right, Nikita, make sure you charge up that set statue. All right, I think that's it for this evening. We're going to leave it there. We appreciate everybody tuning in. I just want to see if I could cover a little more material there. I'm not going to stay on. I think that'll wrap it up for this evening. Next show will be Tuesday night. Be back on Tuesday evening at 8 o'clock. For those that are in the online classes, I will see you Saturday at 3 p.m. I'll send you the link. The next upcoming online session will be July. I have actually, because a lot of people have already started emailing me about it. I didn't expect that many this early, so I have already started working on the next session earlier than I thought I would, due to the fact that people are requesting it. So I'm looking forward to seeing some new people in the summer session, which I will do in July. I'm putting that together now. If you sent me an email, you'll be on that list with all the information you need to sign up for it in July. As you know, the current one's getting ready to finish up, and then I will take a short break. But I will tell you this, and I know I think there's a few people in here now who are taking the classes. I guarantee you it'll be definitely something you can utilize for your own personal growth down the road. That's what it offers. They're thorough sessions. They're quite long, I will add. So you would need to have your availability in line to get the best out of the class, because it's a lot of material that's packed into a 6-7 week session. But anyway, I'll have that information soon. For those that are coming out tomorrow night for the ritual, the Luciferian rite of Azazel, I'll see some of you guys tomorrow night at 8 o'clock. If you need to hit me up for a spiritual reading or a spiritual consultation, just give me a 2-day notice. Anything that I mentioned, all you got to do is the email is in the description box, all the videos, khnum19@gmail.com. Tuesday, we're going to be getting, you'll see the subject. I'll post it soon in the next 2 days. We're getting ready to go into another phase. We're about to tackle some other shit coming up in the next couple of weeks. But you'll see that come shortly in the next couple of days. All right, I appreciate everybody tuning in. Again, I'll reach out to Brother Baal Kadmon. I know he's busy. He travels. He writes a lot. I will reach out to him to see possibly getting him back here in the next month or so if his schedule permits. We'll see. I'll check with him. I'm working on some other guests, a couple of new guests that we haven't had on before. Again, I won't break that until I actually have them confirmed and committed. I'm trying my best to get some of these authors on here of the many books that we read and discuss, so you guys get an opportunity to talk to them yourself. All right. Hey, I appreciate everybody. Appreciate everybody supporting the channel, and I'll see everybody on Tuesday night. All right. Peace.